There's not going to be anything on the screen, so maybe you guys could come in closer. Because I didn't bring flip charts. I mean, I brought flip charts, but I didn't bring slides. You have a handout instead that should have come in your brochure, and that is really an example of how it works, yeah. I want you to have that to take away, and it's really about the US. And I know this is an international group, so I'm really wanting to share with you this around global change as well. So if you're okay there, that's fine. Okay. All right, good. So I actually had an epiphany. Well, I'll start out, but I want to thank Gordon. Thank you, Gordon, for arranging this talk, and Dr. Paul as well. And I believe our society is facing some huge problems. I mean, national society and global society. And I live in a town, Port Townsend, Washington. If I tap somebody in the shoulder and say, hey, our society is unsustainable, they nod. They go, oh yeah, okay. And it's like, well, what? What does that mean? We have to do something, right? So I think this is a thing we can do. And I think and for me, it's a thing we're gonna do. It's not a thing, it's a project. So, but it gets to the heart of the matter because our problems, I believe, arise from our socio-political economic system. It's like, that's bad news in the sense like, gosh, what can we do about that? But it's really good news from the sense that if we could do something about that, that changes everything. Now we don't have all those problems, right? Exactly. It affects all these problems. It affects everything. So I believe that's what I'm going to offer you today, is a strategy for actually doing that. Not only, we don't have to wait for government to do it. And actually 25 years ago, or I guess I had this idea of it, I guess it was 18 years ago, I wrote a book called Society's Breakthrough. And at the time, I thought we needed a constitutional amendment to make this happen, and we had to talk legislators into it, and it would happen globally. But since then, there have been a lot of experiments with this process at the heart of the amendment, and it worked anyway. I mean, it didn't work to change the world, but it worked like, hey, this is going to work. And so I had to revise my thinking. So I'm selling the book out there, but I'm also thinking, I'm sending a piece of sheet of paper with it. It says, this is what I thought in 2002 when the book came out, but here's where we are now. So because it's moved. And if you're not tracking yet, I mean, I'm going to try and repeat and so forth, but we'll have questions. I promise to save time for questions. But first, I'm making this huge promise to you. I'm 72 years old. It's time to come out of the closet and start saying things the way they are. So what I want to do is ask you some questions before we begin. 2 questions before we begin and 2 questions when we end. How many of you think it's likely that what I'm promising can actually be true? Good, we got 1 or 2, 3, 4. Okay, we got some people. All right. That's good. Okay, I didn't expect you actually to raise your hand, but and the second question is, how many of you would like this breakthrough to happen? How many of you would like there to be a breakthrough like that? Some of you don't have your hands up, and I'm actually surprised. If you don't, maybe we should talk later about it. Say it again? Oh, good, yes. You should be. Okay, you can cover for them. That's right. So at the end of this talk, what I want to do is I want to ask you some other questions. One is, how many of you think society's breakthrough might really be possible? And the second I'll ask you is, and how many of you think that the Wisdom Council process might be key in developing it? So I'm hoping that you would move, that you would begin to think, hey, this can really happen. And so let me tell you a little bit how I got into this. I didn't mean to get into this. I was working in the 80s, early 80s, in a sawmill. I was a consultant in a timber company, and I was helping employees. And I got really fascinated in Jungian psychology and in creativity. And I wanted to see what does it take for people to solve impossible to solve problems. It seemed to me, it always seemed to me, that if we have an impossible problem, then we ought to be, rather than saying, oh, that's impossible, and just applying our logic, we would take out our creativity out from our pocket and we'd work on it with creativity. That make sense? It makes sense to me that we have this creativity. Why aren't we using it? So, okay, so I had a laboratory, and the laboratory was a group of mill workers in a sawmill, and management gave me permission. They basically said, Jim, I'm going to angry union meetings 3 days a week, and I just want that to stop. And I don't care what you do down there, just go help those people feel better or whatever. And so I took an hourly group in the day shift and an hourly group of, I say hourly, they're paid by the hour, that's why we call them hourly. And they, we would meet just an hour a week. And I told them to pick problems that they thought were impossible to solve, and we'd work on them. Now you're into meaning, I'll tell you, this is a way to get meaning. Because what they do is they'd pick issues like, I hate the foreman, I want him fired, we can't do anything about that, okay, let's work on that. And so I would facilitate them in developing dynamic facilitation, and they would come up with some stuff. But basically, after a time, they liked them. They wanted them to help more. And they asked them, and the supervisors asked them. So they actually solved their problem, but it didn't happen the way they wanted it to. And then nobody wanted them fired soon. So there was lots of transformation, transforming what's going on in that mill. So anyway, I developed this way of facilitating, and later I moved to Port Townsend, Washington, and I started teaching seminars in dynamic facilitation, and it's kind of taken off. There's people teaching it all over the world, different parts of the world, I'll say that. And it's about standing in front of groups and solving impossible to solve problems. And people that come to the seminars are smart people, and they work on problems that are impossible to solve, and since they're from all over, they pick issues that they share, and they share issues like poverty or the healthcare or the environment or just issues like that, and they would have breakthroughs. And then they would finish the class and they'd leave and go back to their lives, but I was left with these breakthroughs. And I'm sitting there holding this basket of insights and breakthroughs. And one day in 1993, they all came together for me. And I realized, holy smoke, all these problems are caused by our system. And we can change our system in a really simple way, using something similar to what I was doing in the seminars. So I got really excited. I flew to Washington, D.C. I started conferences. I started a television show. I tried lots of things to get this word out. But it really wasn't taking off. So I wrote a book. But what finally has picked up is that the people in Austria and in Europe, especially German-speaking lands in Europe, have picked it up. 2 states of Austria have now adopted it into their constitutions. And there have been national experiments in Austria and in Germany and different places, just experiments. We're just playing around. So I'm thinking this works. It's ready. But in this case, it was government doing it. So I want to make 3 points today. I'm skipping ahead of I wrote my talk out, and now I realize I'm getting ahead of it. So I'll make 3 points. 1, there's a huge difference between decision making and what I call choice creating. There's a huge difference between a decision and a choice. A decision is an act of judgment. You use your judging mind, right? And a choice is an act of creativity. You talk and you work on something and it's impossible seeming, and then everybody looks at one another and realizes, hey, we're all on the same page. We know what to do. And they never did the judgment. They never did the selecting of options and the weighing of options and the analysis and the logicking out of defining the problem first or whatever. They just somehow they had this impossible, difficult problem, and they got to a place where they all knew what to do. So that's point 1. There's a huge difference between a decision and a choice. And that turns out to be the magic sauce. I thought the magic sauce was the amendment to the Constitution. What I'm realizing now, it's really about awakening to this distinction of decision making and choice creating, and noticing the magical features of choice creating. One of the things you might hear people say all the time is we have to have a crisis in order for everybody to change. You know, they say it like, okay, we'll wait till everything gets bad and then things will change, right? But it might not change so good. But yeah, something happens in a crisis. When things get really bad and everybody drops their personas and their roles and they get it that, oh my God, this is not good, whoa, all kinds of magic can happen. I'm giving that kind of thinking a name. I call it choice creating. And it's possible to facilitate choice creating. So we don't have to wait till that crisis happens. We can just start it now. We can facilitate now. And it turns out that one of the features of choice creating when you facilitate it is that if we get a small group, it resonates to lots of people. So that's the first point. I want to just highlight choice, decision. Second point is that to transform our system, our socio-political economic system, all of it, requires periodic stepping back in the spirit of choice creating. In other words, if everybody in a system, in the mill in my case, or in the world, or in the nation, could somehow, we could blow a whistle and stop, everybody steps back and says, okay, how are we doing? We okay? What's going on here? Do we need to make some changes? Let's work on these. No, we don't want this climate change. Let's fix that. In other words, that kind of thinking that you know in your life is the kind of thinking that creates a we the people. It's the kind of thinking that can transform a system. And if you and I could facilitate that on a regular basis throughout a large system, which could be the nation or the world, we're in a different world. We're actually in something called a democracy. Because of what we got now, of course, everybody knows that's not a democracy. But because, voting is not a democracy. But this quality of visiting together and figuring out what's best for everybody and getting excited about those conclusions and working on that basis, that could be a democracy. So those are 2 points. One is decision and choice creating. Choice creating, what that is. The second is this ongoing set of choice creating meetings. And the way I don't have that picture. The way I draw that is, here we are in our system, we're stuck in our box. If you and I could just call a little timeout meeting where we visit and we talk to one another in this choice creating way and we try and solve the impossible to solve problems in our environment, what this does is it flips the system so that we're now in a different kind of system with what I call a we the people actually in charge. And that's point number 2. That's how we get there. Point number 3. The Wisdom Council process, which I will describe in a minute, can actually do that. And you and I could convene that if we had enough money and media support and maybe some celebrities and people that draw attention. So, and what happens in the Wisdom Council is that we randomly select, totally random, mathematical random selection of people from a system. So globally, we can do this. Globally, we randomly select. We hire some firm, survey firm, Gallup or somebody. They randomly select, they bring together 12 to 16 people. And we can take their picture, in fact, and say, oh, okay, this is the first picture of a symbol of all the world's people. Now they go into a room and they're dynamically facilitated to face some monster issue like climate change, or we could have the UN or whatever propose an issue, or we could have an international contest, and they work on it for a day and a half or 2 days, and they come back on and say on stage, here's what we came up with. And it turns out that if they say, here's what we came up with, and they say, gosh, we all got here, we didn't know what to think, we were all turned around, none of us felt adequate, we had translators, we'd never been here, we never traveled, they tell their story. And when they tell their story and they talk about the challenges they overcame along the way, it turns out that what they're saying in that spirit of choice creating is resonant. So when they stand on stage, when they walk on stage and they tell their story and they tell their conclusions, it turns out everybody in the audience pretty much goes, yeah, why aren't we doing that? And it can be the red team, it can be the blue team, it can be top leaders of corporations, it can be bottom people. It turns out everybody, and then everybody turns their chairs, or if they're on the web, or if they're on broadcast TV, wherever they are, we've done something magical here. We've turned around how they talk, how they're thinking about problems. Now we're all thinking, trying to find what's best for everybody. We're not trying to do our battle and win. That choice creating group that you and I somehow facilitated is resonant, and it's creating choice creating in the larger system, and generally people are saying, yes, we should do that. And there's ways then to take that into local neighborhoods and to pick up on the specific actions that have come up, and it can happen. And we're doing it at large scale. Like I say, in Austria, they did it, they passed an amendment to their constitution, and they do a wisdom council every 6 months in Vorarlberg. That's the westernmost state. It's like California. They think that way too. They're on, they pass the amendment, and every 6 months, either the governor says, here's an issue, and then they randomly select citizens from Vorarlberg to work on that issue. Or then the next 6 months, one of the political parties picks an issue. And they say, here's what we think, and then the political parties change. They rotate. And the amazing thing they did is they added another provision. So if you are in Austria and you're upset about something and you get 1,000 signatures, just 1,000 signatures, the government will convene a wisdom council on your issue. So if you're a Muslim angry that we can't have minarets or something in the buildings, you just get 1,000 signatures. They convene a visit, a whole system collaborative choice creating visit about what we want to do about that. And they come up with, and legislators, now in Austria, I gotta say, The government sponsors it, and they're not interested in a we the people that kind of takes over. But they are interested in getting a fast way to get citizen involvement. But what happens in fact is that the legislators, the citizens are actually providing leadership to the legislation. They're saying, here's what we want. And the legislators are saying, okay, how do we get it? So I watched one of these on the web. Sometimes they televise them and you can see them on the web. And I watched, you know, the Wisdom Council walk on stage, and what they did is they shut down the legislature, and the people came across the way from the hall and they sat on tables. So you had all the legislators sitting at tables in their foyer, and the Wisdom Council, the citizens, walked on stage and they tell their story and they show a little video, and then the legislators say things like, no elected representative could have said that. Like one time they did the Syrian refugees, and they basically, the conclusion of the people was, we can help them and they need help. And sure, we're worried about things, but let's take care of those and then help them. And here's how we can do it. And the legislator said, boy, there's no way we could have said that. And other times legislators say things like, the Wisdom Council is wind at my back. To try and, so because they can do stuff. So we're getting some experience of it actually working, even though government's doing it. Now, what I think is even better would be for us to do it outside of government. That you and I and some money and whatever, we would just randomly pick from the world. We would, in the United States, we'd randomly pick from the citizen body. And we just start the process, and we try and get celebrities involved. We try and get people to help us make this really work as a media event, maybe a reality TV show, that kind of thing. So in terms of, I want to be sure and stop for a lot of time for questions. So I want to. Oh, we're good. Okay. So you know, globally, I think a lot of our problems boil down to managing the commons. We have a commons, you know, like the air, the climate, the waters, the soils, the level of trust in the world, which leads to wars, just on and on. How our system, which is based on competition, have you noticed? It's based on competition. Economics, politics, justice, you name it. Systems based on competition. It's based on the idea, the imagination that you are all self-interested. That's your primary motivation, thank you very much. That's what our system is based on. And that's, as you know, here at the meaning conference, that's obviously not what people are up to. That's not what they're doing. That's not who they are. So we can't, it doesn't seem to me sustainable that we would have a system based on competition when we have these commons that we share that you can't divide into private property, that we somehow have to all work together to manage, to steward. We all have to steward these commons. So here's a way to do that. Here's a way to shift that mind so that we, all of us, can start thinking in terms of what we're doing, what we really want to see happen, where we're going. It's a set of vision. Rather than the other thing about our system, it's based on the idea of what we don't want. We're all facing in a direction we don't want to go. We draw these laws and regulations and treaty agreements and things like that. And if you break it, then you're news. And we jump on you. Unless, of course, you're in the elite. But the whole idea is to focus on the bad news and try and correct it. That's our system. And I just in your session about the education, that's fundamentally drives education, of course. So what we have to figure out is some way to shift so that we can actually create a shared vision. And if we did that, it transforms the media. It transforms our management system, how we manage ourselves. It transforms our focus of attention. We're all trying to get to a shared vision. And when we make headway, when you do something weird that makes headway to the vision, then we celebrate you instead of fight you. That's what we need. We need some way to create that shared vision. Here's a way. By the way, I think maybe you've noticed there is no coercion in this. There is no, it's something we can do. We don't need to get government's permission first. We can just start it. And it all hinges on this idea pretty much of choice creating and the magical properties that when there's a crisis, then things can change. Well, we have a way to facilitate that thinking process, that collective thinking process. Now, yesterday was a demonstration of that. We had a workshop, and so we did a thing demonstrating dynamic facilitation. And we chose the issue of poverty. And it was cool. It was cool. We had a small group, I don't know, 7 or 8 people, I guess. One of the people worked for an international foundation that's concerned with poverty, so we worked with that. But when the breakthrough that excited me the most was, I don't know about others, but my fun one was when we got it that maybe it isn't so much to focus on the people who are in poverty. Maybe what we could do is focus our attention and money on the people in corporations that are seeking meaning in their work and help them get it to help those in poverty. So we amplify our efforts. So we actually, rather than working on poverty, we're working on meaning, but it's affecting poverty. I thought that was beautiful. And so anyway, we worked 40 minutes. 40 minutes on poverty, and we were sparking. And that's what's possible. And the demo, you missed the demo, but but the idea is what we do in dynamic facilitation to generate that is we have like 4 charts. People work on an impossible to solve problem. So we're always working on something that nobody thinks we can do anything about. And whatever you say, whatever bubbles up from you, it could be an angry, bitter remark. That's okay. We're going to say, oh, you have a concern. Let me write this concern down on our list of concerns. Okay, do you have a solution behind that? Okay, we'll write that down too. In other words, whatever is in you that comes up, or in the other guy, which normally would tank a meeting, you can say, oh God, we got to put guidelines on the wall, and we have to enforce and be process police and things like that. No, this is just people talking, but the facilitator holds the space so that that's a creative, collaborative talking in the spirit of choice creating. And at the end, we start coming up with stuff and we start appreciating, oh my God, we would never have gotten that breakthrough without you being different than me. See, the normal meeting, if you're different than me, we're screwed, right? Now we have to have a fight or I don't know what, and then we have to compromise on lose. This is about creating win-wins because you're different, celebrating your differences. 2 different dynamics. One is decision-making, the other is choice creating. 2 different worlds. So this is possible in the global sense. Okay, we've got this problem of managing the commons, and it affects everything. In the national sense, in the US at least, I'm getting a call in my ear. This is ridiculous. You don't hear it though, do you? It's in my hearing aid. So, but I'll try and talk through it. Shush. Yeah, so in the national case, in the US, for instance, if I ask somebody, what's the most significant problem we face in society, in our nation? You want to guess? Everybody says the same thing. Everybody says the same. What'd you say? Oh, okay, well that's more one I used to get all the time, but now I seem to get the partisan battle But yes, you're absolutely right, of course. Power concentrated. But the thing is we've organized ourselves into a battle. And I don't know about you, but I used to play basketball. Maybe you played a sport, something like time like that. And when I played basketball, if we were 20 points ahead, we wouldn't say, oh, geez, those poor guys in the other team, we should give them some of our points, you know? And we should ease up on them. No, we didn't do that. Why? Because it was a game. After the game, we might do something, but in the game, we don't do it. And so, of course, power gets concentrated in the hands of this elite because they're winning. They're winning the game, and they want to keep winning. Thank you very much. And it's not that they're bad. It's that we set up this game. We set up the rules of law. You know, we said we're going to have these are the rules of the game. Now we're playing a game. It's not, we're not having this we the people conversation anymore. There was once a we the people conversation. I think it's a great illustration of the Wisdom Council. And that was the founding of the United States. I'm blown away by what happened. They gathered some people in a room, or, you know, and they closed the room. They made it hot. It was the middle of the summer. It was horrible. And because they wanted to keep it secret, and first thing they did was they elect the president of the Congress. George Washington won unanimously because he was the king, you know, sort of. Everybody knew he was kind of king. That's all they knew, king. And so they elected George Washington unanimously. And George did something amazing. He didn't, that I don't think people realize or give him credit for. He didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. He stood back and held space for everybody else to talk. Because everybody knew that even though they were doing Robert's rule, I don't think they had it yet, but they were doing parliamentary procedure, everybody knew we needed all the delegates. We needed all the states. We needed all the people to be on board for this to work. And George must have known that. So, because he held space for, I think, choice creating. Now, we didn't have women, we didn't have Native Americans, we didn't have blacks, we didn't have property, non-property. Okay, a lot of things. But in the time, I believe it was awesome. And then, this is a wisdom council. It's a model of a wisdom council, really. You have this symbolic group, they get together in private, they come up with near unity, or unity in our case. They speak it to the crowd, they tell the world, hey, here's what we came up with, and if you want to ratify this, here's how you ratify it. They told them ratifying conventions. And then in the ratifying conventions, when the people started talking, the most important part of the Constitution was established, right? You know what that was? Well, the Bill of Rights, yeah, freedom of speech, all of those, all 10, yeah. So the freedom of speech. Yes, the Bill of Rights did not come from the founders meeting and that meeting and whatever. They facilitated the rest of the public to be in a public conversation that's near choice creating because everybody's going for it. And it turns out there's lots of descriptions after they passed the Bill of Rights where people are basically saying, hey, I don't think there's any resistance to this. I think everybody's on board. Pretty cool. And that's what I think we can do today. We can do that same model, really, or similar model today. And I think that's the only time that I'm aware of in history. There's probably some others where that kind of thing is done. And I think the rest of democracies were largely built on that model, or from that model, I should say. They've improved things, so anyway, I'm going to check my clock, make sure I'm not going long. Yeah, so here's a way. We got these global problems. We got these national problems. You and I can make this happen. I wanted to tell you one other thing about, I saw this happen. Just in closing, I saw this actually happen about 35 years ago in the sawmill I was telling you about. they weren't randomly selected, but they had a group on day shift, they had a group on night shift, and I was facilitating them 1 hour a week. And one thing I began to realize is everybody in the whole mill is in those meetings. There's 350 people. And as soon as the meeting was over, everybody knew what we talked about, and they started working on the problems also. And at the time it didn't register, but now I'm realizing, oh yeah, that's what we're finding. The second thing was that the management system flipped. So that what was really happening is that the employees were beginning to provide the leadership in the mill, and the management and the supervisors were helping them set the aim. Not totally, but in large measure. So I saw that work, and I think we can do that today. I don't see why we can't do that today. We could randomly select a small group from in the US, small group in Canada, small group in BC, small group in all these different large systems, but most needed is a small group globally. We have to, there's no governance process there. And our commons are in desperate threat, and the system we have is going to tear it apart. So that's, I believe, and here is a way, in my judgment. So let me ask you the two questions I promised, and then we'll have some questions and answers. And the first question is, how many of you think society's breakthrough might really exist? That we really could maybe get those results? Yeah, 1 or 2, 3, a few. My roommate. Okay, good. Maybe 10 or 12, I think. So, and then the second question is, how many of you think the Wisdom Council process might be key in developing society's breakthrough? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Got a lot more. That's great. Yes. Okay, we're ready for that. Yes. So you're saying, how do we get those in power to relinquish their power? Yes. So the Wisdom Council, all of us are really people. If we took people in power, people anywhere, and you pull them together in a retreat center and in a visiting together in the spirit of choice creating, everybody sheds their roles. Everybody just wants the same thing. We're all together. So what we have in practice is that everybody told me, everybody told me that the legislators would resist this. And what's happening is that the legislators in Austria are basically saying, hey, this is a big asset to me, because I don't have to make those calls to raise money and blah, blah, blah. I'm getting direction from the citizens about what they want, and I'm skillful and I can help them get it done. So we have a hierarchy like in the United States right now. Yes.
Which I'm very worried about.
Yes. Well, this is the cure. I know. I don't see to me what we're doing, what we're talking about. I told them I'd draw little pictures once in a while. But okay, so right now we have 4 branches of government, say the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court,
Judiciary,
and the President, the executive. Okay, so, and beneath that is a set of laws, the rule of laws, and above that is what?
Constitution.
Constitution, right. Okay, so that's our system. And what actually happens, of course, here's the people. I don't know if you can see that over there, but I'm sorry, there's the people down at the bottom. And so, but then, and I'm supposed to stay over here. Okay, so Constitution, laws of the people. And then, of course, what's happened in the meantime is there's something missing up here. I didn't leave room for it. And what's that? That trumps everything. Sorry for the use of the word. Trumps everything. But there's something there that trumps everything.
God.
What is it? What? If there was a we the people, like there was way at the back when they set this whole thing up, then that trumps it. So if you and I can somehow step and facilitate that whole system choice creating conversation that yields we the people, and we say, no, this doesn't make sense. Why would we test every law to what the founders were thinking in the 1800s or the 1700s? Why don't we do it to what we think today? You know, we can together, when you strip it away and you get into choice creating, you get a wise set of conclusions that most everybody goes, yeah, that's the way, that could be how we do things. That's one thing. So they're going to make changes if you and I could facilitate that, we the people. The second thing is that, and I'm sorry to say that, but I'm going to draw a triangle, a box, and a circle. The triangle is how things used to be with the king and the emperor and the blah, blah, you know, the great leader. And what we want from that great leader is we want loyalty. That's what that system runs under.
We have it reversed in the United States.
That's right. So then there was a shift. The constitutional period made a shift, and then we got rid of the king, which was on top, and we put a social contract there. Every country has a social contract, but we go with a social contract. There's nothing alive to it. It's dead. It was made a long time ago. Now, what's happening is this is going to break down because the setting of running things by a social contract assures that we'll be in competition. It assures a competitive mode. Now, what's missing is the we the people, the conversation, the whole system choice creating conversation of we the people. That's the missing ingredient to shifting the system from the box to the circle and making our society work again. And it doesn't take that much to do this. So I'm saying that, and the implications, when now this was loyalty, of course today this is competition, and this, this is breaking down. So Trump's just stepping in and saying, hey, we got to go back to the other system. You know, I think that's what's happening. And many people all over the world are saying, hey, this isn't working. We got to go back to the other system. I'm saying there's a way to go forward into this other system. And we don't get rid of anything. We still have the president. We still have the Congress. There's nothing we're undoing. We're just saying we're going to start a process of stepping back and thinking together collaboratively in a whole system way, figuring out what our problems are, what we want to do about them, how we want to go forward. We're just adding that missing conversation.
It's a really good philosophy. It's a really good philosophy. Under current circumstances, I'm not totally optimistic, but I agree with the philosophy. So, but I'd like to share something that I did in my classroom that was so effective. Again, it was just a small space. Being a special ed teacher, I worked in a program we lovingly called the SWAN program, Students with Assorted Needs. So everybody had a different capability. Some were doing algebra and some didn't know how to read. And I had an honor board. In order to get a paper on the honor board, there was no competition with anybody except yourself. It was all self-referenced, and it worked.
Yeah.
The board was filled with children learning how to read or do simple math or algebra problems, as long as it met a criteria of good work on their part, and it worked, and there was cohesiveness in the class. So we have self-reference.
Okay, cool. Other questions? There's one over here. Can you get the mic over there? Yeah, so obviously within this box, we have lots of circles where people are smart and clever and creative and trying to do stuff. It's just that they're restricted by the system. Yeah.
When you described the situation in Austria with people being able to bring an issue to a wisdom council, being convened if they had 1,000 signatures, as a fellow citizen of Washington State, we have an initiative process where citizens can bring issues up for a vote. And there's a particular person who's gotten a lot of issues on the ballot by Tim Eyman.
Yeah.
And, you know, depending on your political persuasion, a lot of people think that the things that he brings up for a statewide vote are kind of ridiculous or not relevant or favor particular interest groups. And so I was curious how, if citizens are able to bring something up for a wisdom council with only 1,000 signatures, how do we prevent the system from being bogged down by people bringing up things that are very highly focused, self-interested, special interests?
See, two things. One is the Austrians have the citizen initiative process and the wisdom council process. So the citizen initiative process requires 5,000 signatures. And of course you have to have a lawyer and make it legalistic, and only special interests tend to do it. But the wisdom council is just 1,000 signatures, and that starts, and it's a different conversation. So there's two answers how to do that. One is there's something called the Citizen Initiative Review, which is my friend and neighbor, Ned Crosby, created the citizen jury process all over the world now. And so he and I live in the same small town. We talk all the time. So, but anyway, his process is in Oregon where they randomly select people, and they use deliberation, not choice creating, deliberation. And deliberation, they take the citizen initiative that's being proposed, and the citizens evaluate it, and then they vote at the end of their meeting, and then they put it on the vote on the ballot, so the citizens can see what's going on. So it's a cool process. But I would do the wisdom council process. I would just say, well, heck, if you're doing the wisdom council process, this circle process, you're just not going to have those problems. And we have to, it's too long to explain why, but yeah. So it'd be great. Other questions? Yeah. John.
I love your approach. I love the philosophy. I'm actually skeptical about all things that have to do with governments, whether it be corporations or countries. I'm skeptical.
Yeah.
Not about your motives, not about your process with us, but just the ceiling that you would run up against. There's the glass ceiling. Whatever this ceiling is started a few hundred years ago in your country, I believe, because this lasted about 2 minutes. Now, I'm with you. I'm one of the 6 or 8 or whatever yesterday. I'm with you, but I've been really wrestling with this ever since yesterday.
Yeah. Well, we'll have time to visit. But
no, not visit. I'm saying, what went wrong back then?
Oh, back then.
What's different now from
I'll tell you what went back.
Preventing it.
No, I'll tell you exactly.
Right?
I'll tell you exactly what went wrong back then. They had a choice-creating conversation. This is my take on it. They had a choice-creating conversation in the founding, and they got to unity, and they said, okay, here's what our system's going to be. Let's go. And there was no way to get the choice-creating conversation back. So ever since you and I were born into a box, we think that's human nature. We think that's life. And this happened all over the world. There was no more we the people. We don't have that we the people. We don't have that opportunity to be we the people. The choice-creating process that's supposed to be there is gone. And so even the founders who were collaborating all this time in the war and pulling together this document and all this stuff, as soon as that document was done and the Constitution was implemented, they started fighting. Everybody fights. I mean, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson were great friends, you know, and George Washington was friends, and James Madison was friends, and they were so arch enemies for years and years and years and years. And then in the last 12 years of their lives, they were all in their deathbeds and whatever, and they made friends again.
Excuse me, John. We're going to have to stop, I'm afraid, in terms of time. Yeah.
Yeah. Frenemy. 2 minutes left. Okay. Yeah.
So I hope you find a way to make it user-friendly.
Well, you see, look at yourselves. This is hard to grapple with. I'm offering a strategy. I still have yet to find a problem with it. Nobody's ever said to me, Jim, this is going to take us backwards. There's a problem here. Nobody's ever said that in 25 years of talking about this. But the first 23 years, the main reaction of people was anger. And I never did figure that out. But then I realized Copernicus died on his deathbed is when he decided to publish his book because it was so threatening. You know, I mean, it's really threatening when you and I are born into a system and it becomes the thing to, you know, we're talking about changing it. So, okay.
So we're going to need to stop now. You've given us a lot of provocative ideas to think about, and I just want to thank you for your presentation.
Thanks.
Round of applause.
Round of applause.